Coast to coast, border to border, and around the world, it's time for The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a guest-driven program where the topics are diverse and entertaining. Laugh and learn while you listen to one of the best hours of online radio. Now, here's your host, Bill Alexander.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Bill Alexander Show with yours truly, William Eric Alexander. All my friends call me Bill. I'm so glad to have you today. First interview of 2023. I've been doing this so long, I don't think I ever thought I'd see 2023. But anyhow, this is a very interesting one today. And I really don't know if I can explain it fully. So I'm going to let the author do that, who I'm talking to right now, is Seana Zelazo, and she has written a book, The Way of Inanna. Seana, how are you doing today?
I am so well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be your first interview of 2023.
Well, I am so glad. Now, to let everybody know, this was supposed to be a Zoom interview, but she had some difficulties on her end, and she's telling me it's because Mercury is in retrograde. Which, as I told
Absolutely.
her, I have no idea what that means, but it sounds really good.
It means it's not our fault.
Yes. If I can blame it on someone else, I will, or something else, I will.
There you go.
So, explain to me, first off, why you wrote the book.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I wrote the book because, well, first I would say the goddess Inanna is the Sumerian goddess of love and war. And in my own exploration of the divine feminine, I felt an instant and very strong remembering of Inanna, that it felt as though she was literally tapping me on the shoulder and wanting to be brought back into the now. And I do feel like her energy is coming back collectively, and it's in part because the archetype of the goddess that she represents is one that is extraordinarily valuable right now, and that is this love warrior, this individual who is using her power to slay separation consciousness. And that's really how I conceptualize her expression as a goddess of war. So this sort of paradoxical energy is very relatable, right? In the sense that we can ourselves be fiercely loving. And her energy is really, really very valuable for bringing about a new way of relating to ourselves and to the whole. And so it really felt like, in part, the reason I wanted to write this book was because she wanted to be sort of remembered. And so that was really at the basis of my intention.
Now, when reading this book, I usually skip over the preface because I usually don't think it has a lot of information in it. But honestly, I read the preface, and that could be a book on its own because of the situations you dealt with, the passing of your mother, and dealing with that and everything, and then how it brought you to the goddess Inanna is very, very moving, is I guess the best way to put it.
Thank you.
And how you dealt with it, because my audience should know that you are do we want to call you a professional runner? You were qualifying for the Olympics, or tried to multiple times. So that was, in the way you said it was, you were running away from yourself and running away from your problem until you ran literally into Inanna and you started writing this book.
Absolutely. And yes, I competed. My training as a runner got me to the Olympic trials, never close to actually making the Olympic team, but I'll take that. And absolutely, it was a process. And I feel like that, even that aspect of Inanna as a warrior is very much a way in which I relate to her as an athlete, because she's a very embodied goddess in that she insists on her physicality. And so even as an athlete, I found a connection with her. And so I was able to sort of use the mythology to help me reframe my experience into one of empowerment. And that is really what I was hoping to do through sort of weaving her stories together in the way that I did in the book.
So you're a licensed social worker, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
With writing this book, were you able to relate it to what you do for a living? Because
Absolutely.
I know social workers that some of the stuff they deal with is very difficult, but it sounds to me that with writing it and researching it, that this goddess, Inanna, has actually empowered you to move forward.
Most definitely. And indeed, the book is structured to include her myths alongside analogous contemporary challenges that we face that I see in the work I do. For example, one of the chapters is related to addiction and overcoming addiction. What shows up in the psychotherapy office or in even the coaching office is really what people come in when they're in transition. So transition out of addiction, transition in all the different ways. And so certainly the mythology offers, to your point, an empowered perspective of how to negotiate what's showing up in the now. And it's really similar, even though the mythology was written, almost, around 4,000 years ago on, in cuneiform, on clay tablets. And the work was not rewritten. It was simply translated as it was initially written down. And that's significant because that's quite different than some of the other myths that we come up or that we experience in our history. This is straight up the way it was intended to be delivered, which is really powerful because it positions a feminine figure as the heroine and a powerhouse. She is a powerhouse. So absolutely, I definitely see a correlation between her stories and the current day situations that we might face. Absolutely.
Now, I don't want to sound like someone that's I don't know how to put it, but how does something like this empower you? Because I've interviewed a lot of people over the last few years that have written books not about her, but similar to this, and I've never been able to get a straight answer on why do you think this empowers you? Why does this give you the permission to do that, and why aren't you able just to do it yourself?
What a beautiful question. Thank you. I love that question so much because ultimately the working with goddess energy and her energy in particular is an energy of an archetype of the feminine that was not perpetuated, right? This idea of this sort of very badass, strong, powerful woman who is unapologetically who she is, and she loves herself. One of the prominent aspects of her mythology is her focus on her celebration of her, literally spoken in this way, of her holy vulva. And that's not just being, rude or graphic or whatever. She is highlighting the power of sacred feminine power, which resides in the second chakra, the creative, generative energy that is, associated, of course, with the mother energy. But Inanna's not known. She is a mother. In her mythology, we see two of her sons. But that's not the focus. Her focus isn't on the mother archetype, but on the I love myself, and as I love myself, I prioritize focusing on what is literally love. So through loving self, I then can express love in the external reality. So I can shift within to shift the without. And right now, that is one of the most important things we can do when we look around at everything that is changing. This dramatic shift in the world really is an invitation for us to begin to lead with love. And the best way to do that, really, in my opinion, even in the work I do, is through beginning within and transforming our relationship with ourselves. And Inanna comes in and she's inviting us to be unapologetically in love with ourselves and to celebrate our sexuality as women, as all people. What's beautiful about Inanna is that many scholars interpret her as being androgynous, which is another reason why I love her so much, right? Because she kind of invites this spacious liminality where she pushes up against anything that's confining, and she says, no, Do not label me. Don't define me in one category or another. I am all that I am. I consistently evolve. I shift. I change. And I give myself permission to evolve. And that's what we need right now. So it's empowering in many different ways, but it's this reclamation of that archetype of the goddess that we haven't fully seen come back, And Inanna's ready. She is, I see a lot of her beautiful energy in what's happening in Iran right now, where women are reclaiming. I mean, there is such courage and bravery in these women. And I see that as very aligned with this energy we're talking about, this love warrior energy, right?
So the energy you're talking about is coming from within, correct?
Yes. Well, our connection with the goddess in general is, we can conceptualize it as a force, connecting with a force. But yes, it is internalized, and what it does when my experience with it is that when we connect with that energy, it in essence dissolves the internalized oppressive energy that we may have developed over many lifetimes, given the experiences we've had in the, at least over the last 3,000 years regarding the way the patriarchy suppressed the feminine energy. So this is an invitation to reclaim that, and she is leading the charge. She is like, let's do this, and she's doing it fully in her body, which is another reason why I love this. Her mythology really emphasizes her celebration of self, of her physiology, of her pleasure, and what that does for us in human form is it says, look, you can access your divinity even while being human. And that's an important message because she's bringing us into our divinity, or bringing spirit into matter. And that's something that I really wasn't able to see as much in other goddesses. I mean, I didn't see this emphasis on her own pleasure in other stories.
So
yeah.
prior to writing this and prior to finding out who Inanna was, were you interested in mythology beforehand, or was for some reason you were just led to it?
I have always been in connection with the divine feminine, and I definitely. So I'm also an intuitive, and this feels like a memory. This feels like a connection that has endured over many lifetimes, and that this is not my first. It feels like this is not my first go around as a sort of devoted, sort of being in devotion to Inanna. So the divine feminine, my interest in the divine feminine started when I was very young, and explored various, not only mythology, but various expressions of the divine feminine. The first energy that I connected with was green Tara, and I worked with that energy in a meditative process very consciously for many years. And then Inanna came in. It was almost like the energy of green Tara is very gentle, and Inanna's is different. It's very strong, and it's not that green Tara's is not strong, but it's a different energy. So I have been, a student of goddess energy and the goddess in general for a long time. Yes.
So you said you were an intuitive? Or
yes.
What does that mean?
So in addition to my training as a psychotherapist, before I went into private practice as a psychotherapist, I was a hospice social worker, so I worked in end of life, and then transitioned into private practice, and then transitioned into doing intuitive work, wherein I do help others develop their own intuition and work one-on-one in that way and in workshops and such. But I also do readings, and wherein I connect with the person's Akashic records and their guides and their higher self, that's separate from psychotherapy. It's totally different. And that work is really a sort of, in my opinion, it's very direct and very specific. We're holding a mirror, in essence, to the individual to see what their own truth is and their own inner guidance. So, yes, I work in that way as well.
How do you teach someone to do that?
So that's a beautiful question, and I really fundamentally believe we all have intuitive gifts. And so it's very much like being an athlete. we have an opportunity to develop our intuition when we align our intention and our attention, and we devote and create space to the development of it. And in other words, like if we're training to run a 5K, we got to put in the miles, you know? And this is also true with the intuition. The more that we engage it, the stronger that it gets. And also, the more that we engage it, the more faith we have in it. And faith, ultimately, feels like the bridge to it. We often feel like a lot of folks will come in and say, look, if I had the evidence, you know, if I was working with my guides and I heard them loud and clear and it was, you know, just completely obvious, then I'd have faith in it. But that's not how it works. It really works with us putting in that energy and that devotion and that time and having the faith that it will come through clearly, and then it does. So
I have so many questions. When you're training someone to do this,
yeah,
how I mean, they have to come in wanting to do it. Okay?
Absolutely.
They have
That's
to.
right.
But
That's right.
how do they develop the faith, or how do you develop the faith for them that they know this is going to work?
It's very much like working with, I really love the analogy of working with an athlete, because that athlete knows they have that orientation, right? They wouldn't show up in a particular sport that they didn't feel necessarily like they wanted to invest time in, they didn't feel really aligned with. So it's really in facilitating, consistently bringing someone into a wider perspective, I think of it as a zoom out lens, consistently helping the individual to look at what's showing up in their life from a zoom out lens so they can see how it's all connected. And when they see how it's all connected, they start to open to the signs the universe is bringing to them and the ways in which their higher self is directing them. So the way that it's very individual for everyone, but I would say if I had to boil it down to the simplest way is working very much with our intention and our attention and creating a practice, a devotional practice wherein we are spending time engaging with our intuition in various ways, and it becomes stronger and stronger. And ultimately, to your point, the interest has to be there in the same way that athlete who maybe has a goal to run a 5K in a certain time, they have to have their own inner motivation to stick with it, right? And I really feel it's super important to engage with our intuition in a way that feels fun and joyful. And so the book merges spirituality and psychology, and in using my intuitive ability to bring in ritual. So the end of each chapter has a ritual or a meditation that's offered, and ritual is super fun as a healing modality because it's artistic and it's really joyful when you get into it, and it can be done with others, but it puts the healing in your own hands. And that's what I try to bring in the training I do with folks around intuitive development, is to bring it into a place that feels joyful and fun. So that's a priority.
So, and I've asked this question before, and I've never got a solid answer on it,
Sure.
is actually how to meditate. And when you meditate, is that when you're connecting with Inanna and other goddesses?
Yes. And I am a big believer that the meditation has to work for you. And for some people, meditation is active, right? Like it's a walking meditation, or it's a yoga practice, or it's dance, or it's being in the woods. I'm a surfer, and like that's a very meditative process to be, in the sort of pre-dawn time where you're out on the ocean, and you're in a rhythm, and it's extremely meditative. But you're not sitting with your eyes closed in lotus position, right, before your altar. I do work with an altar myself, wherein I do meditate in front of my altar, but that's just like an orienting principle that I find useful because it is a space where I experience it as a portal. So I can go in and I can align with my own guides and connect with the energies that I am wanting to connect with. In writing this book, I certainly brought in the energy of Inanna when I was writing, and I think most writers and most artists do that. They bring in the creative energy in whatever way. I just so happen to invite in a very specific energy, but I think that many artists do this. They open themselves to the muse or the creative process that wants to come through. So in terms of wanting to help give you a straight answer about meditation, I feel like it's very individual. And for some people, their meditation is very useful if it's like a mindfulness practice where they're staying with the breath. And for other people, it's about opening up to questions and saying, hey, team, what have you got for me?
Okay.
My spiritual team. So it's different.
Because I've done the meditation, not in lotus position because I can't get into it, but I don't. Everybody said let everything go, and I can't. I think about what happened during the day, and I can't escape that. And it's like, wait a minute, why am I doing this wrong, and how do I do it right? But what you tell me, there's so many different types of meditation that there's not just one meditation for everyone, and that makes a lot of sense.
Right. And I think it's very common. I see a correlation between folks that are very in their body and movement. That makes sense, right? Like when those that I know that are very in their body, in their world, like whether maybe they're performance artists or they're, yoga practitioners or whatever, they may not, or athletes or whatever, they may not feel super resonant with that particular, like mindfulness practice, for example. But they may do mindfulness in another way, which is like cognitive behavioral therapy, which is kind of the go-to treatment modality in psychotherapy, is mindfulness meditation. And many folks consider Buddha as the first cognitive behavioral therapist because it's the same concept. So we can almost like apply it in different situations. So, for example, if we're working on not getting, if we're working on our patience, and not being impatient, we can bring that in, and that can become a practice or a meditative practice in our day. So if we're held up in line by somebody that's ahead of us at the checkout line, we can now use that in the moment as a meditative practice, but we're not closing our eyes sitting in lotus position. So we can just sit with the feeling that goes, oh my God, I am going to be late. I'm really annoyed, to, okay, this is happening for a reason. It's an invitation for me to develop my practice. And it might be just 5 minutes, but it might be 2 seconds. And either way, I'm doing a meditative practice. So anytime we bring it's always about intention. Bring your intention.
That makes all the sense in the world to me because, like I said, I've always heard meditating, lotus position, all that. And now I understand what you're saying, the mindfulness, because when I walk on the beach, I forget the surroundings around me, and that's when I start having mindful, I don't want to say conversations, but that's when I have mindful thoughts. I've also done that while driving, that when I snap out of it, I don't know how I got to where I got because I'm in that deep thought. So that makes sense that if I can do that, but I don't have to do it in the way society thinks it needs to be done.
Absolutely.
And that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, I'm so glad. And that's definitely also the way we can conceptualize connecting with our own intuition. It doesn't have to be it's very individual. Sometimes it's super subtle and sometimes it's extremely pronounced. And oftentimes in the beginning of our intuitive development, we might think that it has to be super loud, but that's not really how spirit works. It's often really subtle. Like imagine, I don't know, but the difference is that we see it. And when we see it, it starts to get louder. So if we confirm for ourselves and we have faith, for example, imagine we're seeing something like, a song comes on the radio as soon as we sit in the car. And we're like, that song is speaking directly to me. When we say, yeah, it is, then what happens is we develop more faith in it, and it starts to happen more frequently, and then it starts to come in more pronounced. And in the beginning, we might say that was just a coincidence, we're making it up. But the more that we engage consciously with what's showing up in our reality and looking for what it's offering us, which is also in essence a mindful practice, then we get the messages. They come to us, and we can receive the gift that's showing up for us, and then it gets stronger.
Okay, so because then I have the question: meditating. Then when you are prior to the book and Nana and everything else, did you have to research her? Or did something just happen that clicked and going, okay, I've heard this name, I can relate to it, now I got to find out who it is?
Oh, wonderful question. Thank you. Yes, I literally came on, as I am, like I said, I've always been interested in the divine feminine, so it's sort of my topic of, if I'm looking for something to read. And so I came upon her most well-known myth, which is called The Descent of Inanna. And the others are lesser known, but extremely beautiful and powerful. But The Descent of Inanna, it was a story wherein she is called to, she is the queen of, she has many epitaphs, so not only goddess of love and war, but she's also the evening and the morning star. She's the queen of heaven and earth. So she's up on the sort of upper world, like she's loving her life as queen, and something calls her to the great below, where she goes through this beautiful and powerful initiatory experience where she dies and is reborn. And what struck me in this story is that this story preceded the story of Christ, and a lot of the same aspects were brought into Christ's story. So she dies, she's put to death for 3 days and 3 nights, which we see.
Interesting.
She's hung as a corpse on the wall, on a nail on the wall for 3 days, which is very similar. And she then resurrects. She comes up and is restored to life. And then she brings this information to her people, and she brings about, a sort of a practical way in which to work towards making known the unknown, transcending fear, reclaiming our shadow aspects. And as I read this story, I saw such a beautiful way to reconceptualize my own experience. And what you were referencing in the preface was the story that I shared about my own mother's passing, and also sexual assault. And the way that I was able to move through it and see it as sort of like a death and rebirth was through her story. Yeah. And then I was hooked.
Well, what's really interesting is that whenever you're saying that, I was thinking about your mother's death, the assault and everything else, and I'm going, you rebirthed yourself. And a light bulb went off my head, and I'm going, okay, now this makes sense. Now I know why that you did that. And again, and how you basically pushed yourself into running because you were running away from the situation that you didn't want to deal with. So
absolutely.
Absolutely. You just gave me an epiphany. That was wonderful because I see that.
Thank you.
Now, the other thing I question, and I didn't think of this before, because when you related it to Christ, do you think that the story of Inanna did not take over like the story of Christ did because she was a woman?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There was a great intention to sort of bury alive goddess consciousness and conscript all her symbols into, the church did that. The church took over literally her temples and built their own upon it. And so, yes, absolutely. I think that, and that's one of the reasons why I think she's re-emerging. I mean, she is coming back into the collective consciousness, and that, I think part of that is the ways in which she reclaims. She's saying, look, she's what I call a teacher of the death mysteries. And to me, death and my own work in end-of-life work it's connected to rebirth. And right now on the planet, we are positioned to shift away from an old paradigm and move into a new paradigm of love. And she's saying, as goddess of love, she's saying, come on, let me show you how to do it. It all starts with you. It starts within. So
other than you writing your book, have other people done the same thing and interpreted her readings the same way you have and related them to today's society?
I have not seen that, but you know how creativity is, right? Like
right.
It's in the ethos. It sparks people everywhere. I haven't seen it related in the way that I've done it. The way that I did it was I created, so in the underworld, in her story of the descent, she comes to the 7 gates of the underworld. And at each gate, she has to remove one of her royal attributes. Remember, she's queen of heaven and earth. So she's decked out when she comes into the underworld, and she has to go through each gate and literally strip one of the items off so that she enters the underworld bowed low and naked. So in humility and completely stripped, totally vulnerable, she surrenders. And there's a deep message in that. So many people have interpreted that particular myth, but the other myths, and how that relates to, in essence, what we could conceptualize as, like what I see as a therapist as narrative therapy. We have a chance to rewrite our own story from a place of empowerment if we look at it through the lens of a heroine's journey and from her process. But the way of aligning each chapter I call a gate, and each one I take a myth or a hymn of hers, I relay the myth, and then put it alongside, like I was using the example of addiction. I use one of her stories called the Hulupu tree and put it alongside addiction and explain how they're correlated and how her story is giving us insight into how to work with addiction and let it go and move beyond it. So I haven't seen that, but I have seen definitely a restored interest in her, and many scholars have written about her, and she's like I said, she's definitely coming back into the collective consciousness, which is beautiful.
Now, another question I have, which is from the preface, that I read it multiple times because you said you were dealing with people in hospices that were dying.
Yeah.
And were you actually dealing with them transitioning, or were you dealing with the family?
Both. So
Okay.
in hospice, you first are working specifically with the patient, and certainly you can also, as a social worker, work with the family. But then there's up to a year bereavement service that's offered after the person transitions that you offer to the family. So it's both. But yes, it was an incredibly powerful training in an extraordinary, in the rite of passage of death, to be able to work in hospice. I love hospice. I love what it does, and how it is so beautifully supportive in every way. I'm really grateful for that opportunity.
The other thing is that you use the word transition from
Yes.
life to death. And I don't hear that very often, but the way you say it, it sounds much more pleasing, much more natural, not just like using the word dead, which everything just stops.
Yeah.
So there is, with your doing, there is a belief that the individual is going from a mortal life to a spiritual life?
Yes.
Okay.
And that it's just like, I don't go back to something my mom taught me when I was just a little girl, because I have been really, intuitive my whole life, and my mom was very, very intuitive herself and sort of fostered my orientation. So I remember as a young girl, her explaining death to me, and she said, very nonchalantly, it's just like we're changing clothes. And she told me this, I remember I was 6, and I remember really understanding it. And I still feel this way. I just have a sense of, and in the intuitive work that I do, it feels very much like that. It's like moving from one room of the house to another. And, we're still in connection. We're still all in the same house, but, your loved one might be in the, the attic or whatever. And you can still be in connection. It's just in a different way. You're not speaking to them in the physical, but they're in a new iteration of their, or not new, they're in their spiritual expression. Yeah. And I don't feel the connection ends.
Okay.
Some of the most, I love mediumship for so many reasons. Mediumship as, individuals that connect with those who've transitioned and bring forth that energy as a counseling modality. Because in my work, in traditional, when I was doing traditional psychotherapy as a grief counselor, some of my clients would go and have a mediumship reading with somebody, and they would come in and they'd be like, I'm all set. I'm good. We're good. Because it was so fast and so effective to have that one mediumship experience. And it was like it took care of what I'd been working on maybe for several months,
So
in just 1 hour or something.
That's very interesting to me, because I've talked to 3, maybe 4 mediums on this program
Wonderful.
John Edwards being one of them.
Oh, he's wonderful.
Which he blew me away.
Right, he's amazing.
Because I was in the middle of a conversation with him, and I was talking about him doing the reading, and all of a sudden he was reading me, and I didn't know it, which was really interesting, because he stopped me and he said, "Do you recognize these names?" And I'm going, "Well, yeah, but I didn't think you were talking about me." So.
Oh wow! What a gift! Yeah.
But that's what I'm asking. So when you do, are you able to turn it on or off, or is it always there?
Well, I wouldn't. I personally don't identify as a medium.
Okay.
Sometimes guides come. I mean, sometimes loved ones do come through in my readings. They do,
okay.
But I don't. I wouldn't identify that way. And when they come through, yes, I can turn it on or off, and that's some of the things I teach. I don't turn it on or off. I just have my sacred boundaries up. It's not off. I just allow myself to interact. Like when I was doing hospice work, I would do a lot of work in nursing homes. Some of our patients would be in nursing homes.
Right.
And that was intense for me because I was like, whoa, there are so many people that want to come through right now. And I would just have to, I literally had to look down at my feet to get through to the patient's room because I could feel so many other souls that wanted to connect and were like, hey, you can see me? Come on, let me,
right.
That kind of energy. And I really would intentionally wash all that energy away at the end of my shift like when I came home in a shower to clear away that energy because they were really trying to reach out and they could identify that I could hear them, But yes, I teach, I think it's really important to teach the sacred boundaries to protect yourself because when you're sensitive, you can pick up stuff that you don't necessarily need to be carrying around, right? Like somebody else's anxiety or something like that.
Right.
And I also, the way I work, I always want to honor somebody's their free will. So the way I work is I won't just read someone unless they're saying, hey, I'd like a reading from you, and let's tune in. And I have a very ritualistic process with it. So that establishes that kind of what you're talking about of turning on, turning off. It's not so much turning off. It's like dialing up or not, or hanging up for a second. Yeah.
So have you been able to reach, I mean, I hate to say it because it sounds like a parlor trick, but have you been able to reach out to Inanna?
Oh, yeah, I definitely, absolutely. And I think many people do. The energy is when I tune, and I do it regularly. At this point, I do it daily. So I think many people do that. And again, I want to emphasize we all can. And it's the way that she'll come through for me is I'll pose questions. I'll say, look, I am really working, like she was extremely helpful in helping me work through this sort of fear of being seen.
Okay.
Sort of like, when you put something like your, your deepest secrets out in a book, about your most vulnerable stories. I definitely had to go, gulp. Okay, here goes. And I called in her energy very regularly to help dissolve some of that anxiety around it, and just really could feel her using her weapons of light to clear it away. So I think that what I want to emphasize is we all can do this. It's, again, just bringing your intention and your attention to it, and your practice. Create a practice.
Because the house that I'm living in,
yes.
there was a family that lived here for over 100 years before my wife and I bought the house. And there's been passings in the house, and I still think that a few of them are here. It's not that I've communicated with them, but I can feel it in the room, and I can see movement when there's nobody there. And it's like I would really like the ability to be able to communicate in a way that would let me know why they're here and what I can do or what they want me to do. And I can't figure that out. And I've been dealing with that now for almost 20 years.
Wow. Amazing. And it's certainly like there's definitely, I would say that is supporting your own intuitive development. In other words, those beautiful souls that are there are helping you trust that you are seeing, feeling, hearing, experiencing, knowing their presence. And that's developing your faith in yourself. When you see that movement or you sense that their presence. And so it's about being like creating a space and asking, is there something you want to communicate
Yeah.
to me? Like really creating an open space where that dialogue can happen just by bringing your attention to it and making sure that you are aligned with their highest good, helping them see that, you are here to support them in whatever way, and, inviting them to convey to you what it is that they want to convey. So I would say you are extremely blessed to have that experience, because it's showing you how intuitive you are.
Well, I think my dog is more blessed than I am, because my dog will literally walk into the room that he walks in all the time, and he will stop, look up, and start barking.
Oh,
and we
yes.
know that he's barking
Yes.
at someone, and
Yes.
it's like just the way he reacts. And I'm going, so-and-so, the owner's here now, and they must want something, because he's standing there barking at them, and then all of a sudden
Yes.
he'll stop.
Right,
Nothing
right.
else going on. He just stops. And I believe
Wow.
that he is feeling that energy of some sort, or maybe even seeing it,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
of how intent he is. And it's not a vicious barking. It's a barking to alert that someone's there.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
again, it's really unique. And the way you explain it makes a heck of a lot of sense. I should have talked to you before I talked to everybody else, and then I would have understood them.
I love it. I think it's really, I totally agree that our animals are definitely perceptive, and they can, that's also a gift, in that you're seeing how the animal realm is able to perceive and be in connection, and it shows that, like, there isn't an end. There's this continuation, and different there's always this sort of, death is this sort of shift into another form, and we're having multiple deaths on a daily basis. Even you and I are different than even the conversation we started at the beginning.
Yes.
So, like we are, one of the reasons I love Inanna is because, as I mentioned, she is a goddess of the death mysteries. She deliberately makes known what is unknown. And in doing so, she helps dissolve our collective fear of death. And we really are, in our culture, we tend to avoid it, and there are many beautiful other cultures that are more comfortable with it. But I think she's doing that. She's saying, look, why are you afraid to evolve? Why are you afraid to shift? Come on, let's make it known. Let's go see what wants to. Let's reclaim the entirety of who we are. When she goes into the underworld, she reclaims her shadow aspect. And that doesn't imply that part of her is dark. I just mean that was a part she had disavowed. She hadn't connected with. And ultimately, the death process is truly this way to become whole, and that's what leads to the ascension.
So with the stories that you share of Inanna, are you able to relate those to certain stories to certain situations? Because you mentioned with the drug and everything.
Yeah.
Being able to do that. Has it, are there stories there that you can relate to anything?
Absolutely. I see connection in all things. And I think that, that's one of the things that Inanna represents is she is all about unity consciousness. So when you conceptualize the idea of unity, that also, not only does it mean we are all one and we're all connected, but that also implies that everything is a part of our evolution. So literally, yes, with her stories, I can see the way I see every day in my life and in everyone's life. I see those stories as very similar to our everyday life, wherein whatever shows up in our reality on any day-to-day basis, if we are paying attention, is providing us a training in our evolution. Something like, when somebody comes in and, I don't know, maybe they're not happy with you or something, and it creates a little bit of a tug in your solar plexus where you feel not so great. It would be in that kind of situation we can pause and we can say, why did that happen? Like, what is my soul working on to grow? What am I balancing karmically here? And what am I working on? If it shows up in my solar plexus, what's going on in my solar plexus that's wanting to heal? And how is this actually an invitation for me to grow? But her stories do that. So if you look at any of her myths, each one is really a story about her stepping further into her power. And when we relate to our reality as a training to evolve, we become empowered. We're like, yes, I am more conscious now as a result of how I interfaced with my day,
So I'm going to have you diagnose the whole United States right now and ask you why you think that so many people cannot accept things like this.
Well, there's a few things going on with that. And it really is fear, I think. It comes down to fear. It comes back down to just where we are in our, let me think about it, how to articulate it best. Like a lot of times, if there's something that we're resistant to, it's because there's a wound sometimes that wants to be resolved before we have access to a different perspective. And sometimes like when someone is maybe not in a place of acceptance, right? It creates an opportunity for somebody who is to be in further acceptance of someone who's not accepting, right? Like it's this invitation to acceptance. To me, is the state of equanimity that we strive for, to be at complete peace with everything. When we're at complete peace with everything, we accept that it's all exactly as it should be. And so when we even think about how there's this sort of, there are many people that believe and many people that don't, right? Like that even that serves our evolution, because we can hold the space for that and say, well, that's exactly what's supposed to be their journey. It's not better or worse. I'm not more aware than they are, or they're not more aware than anyone else is. It's just exactly where we are all intended to be. And our evolution of consciousness is sort of like this. It's an evolution. It's like a spectrum. And I like to think of it like this: when somebody is in the very early stages of their schooling, like their first grade, second grade, we cannot say that second grader or first grader is any less intelligent than the person getting a PhD, right?
Right.
They're just different places. And that young person might have the most brilliant way of conceptualizing reality and understanding reality. So every perspective is welcome. You know what I mean? Like, so when some people have resistance to, I don't know, thinking about a goddess, right? Or working and channeling a goddess, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I look at that and I say, that's perfect, because that's what is true for you, And just as I'm wanting to be okay with what's true for me, I'm totally down with what's true for you, So in terms of, but I think that when there's, a lot of anger about things like, different ways of looking at things, and when there might be judgment, I see fear in that,
The fear of the unknown.
Yes, right.
And that's interesting. And when you mentioned compared the first or second grader to the one with the PhD, it also confirms my belief that society is what gets in the middle of that child achieving everything that child can achieve. It all depends on where they're at and where they were born, what part of the country, the world, whatever it was. Because I think everybody has the same shot. I can say it. Trust me. Same shot. Gosh, I can't speak. I'm a communication grad. Shot. There you go. Everybody has the same shot as everybody else. It all depends on where they were placed.
Absolutely.
And who mother and dad were. I mean, I hate to say it, it's a crapshoot.
Well, and it's such a powerful thing to think about too, because when we really are in a place of equanimity and a state of acceptance, what we're really doing is we're taking that super, super far zoom out lens where we see, like, sometimes when we incarnate very deliberately to work out something that wants to be worked out, or to have a life experience that will yield our evolution as a soul. So, for example, we might engage in something that maybe other people think is not such a great thing to do, but maybe in doing so, I don't know what example would be like. I don't know in a good example, but the idea here is that there is a way where each of us is on our soul journey, and sometimes we have to make choices that maybe others would say, I might not have made that choice, but then that yields the descent, like Inanna, that brings us to our knees and allows us to then use the purchase of the great below to rise again, to push ourselves back up, to bounce back up. So it's one of those things that sort of like a parent watching their kid learn to walk or something. We want to intervene and go like, no, don't fall on your butt. But we also have to give them the chance to figure out how to get back up. And so, it's just this, when we hold that place of deep acceptance of everybody's situation, it just changes everything. We're like, well, that's obviously what they're working on. And it just makes it easier,
Again, the way you talk, the way you explain it makes all the sense in the world. And it's so nice to be able to hear someone that can put it in terms where we all can understand it. And I can relate and I can agree and everything else. Now, as you said, we started off on one subject and we went all over the place. Can you tell my audience how to get your book?
Absolutely. And, just to say, that's so totally Inanna because she's so multidimensional. She has all these different aspects of herself. So right on target with Inanna. So my book, The Way of Inanna, A Heroine's Guide to Living Unapologetically, is available at booksellers worldwide.
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
That is great. So when was the book released?
The book was released in September of this year, of 2022. Rather, yeah.
So how are the sales going on the book?
Oh, it's going great. I'm so excited. Yes.
That's really cool. Now, okay, since you said they're available at booksellers worldwide, what section of the bookstore is it in?
Oh goodness, I would say I believe it's in the spirituality section. That's where I would think it would be, but it might also be in mythology. Okay,
because that's one of the things I get whenever someone says they have their book and they're going where it's at, and then I get a phone call going, but where would it be?
Yes, absolutely.
So. Totally.
And I started a podcast, so I have a podcast, the Unapologetic Heroine podcast.
Oh, really?
Which is so fun and a new medium for me, and I'm really enjoying it. And interviewing folks that are unapologetically who they are and really representing the energy of living love. So that's been a very fun experience, and that is available on it's through the Sacred Stories, which is my publisher. I'm through Haniel Press through Sacred Stories, and Sacred Stories is sort of the holder of my podcast, and so it's through Sacred Stories, but it's called The Unapologetic Heroine, and it's on all the podcast mediums.
That sounds good. Seana, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it today. It was so nice talking to you and being a part. I would love to have you on the show again in the future if you would be willing to come back.
Oh, my gosh. I would love it. I'm so honored, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and you have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
A big thank you goes out to Seana Zelazo for being a part of the program today. What a blast that was. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, talking about her new book, The Way of Inanna, A Heroine's Guide to Living Unapologetically. Yes, it's a female goddess, but even us guys can get something out of it, because like I told her, it was a great book, and you need to pick this up and read it, because I think it would open up a lot of doors for a lot of us out there. So everybody, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you being a part of the program, and we'll talk to you next time here on The Bill Alexander Show.
Thank you for listening to The Bill Alexander Show. The Bill Alexander Show is a $1 Million Baby production. For more information, go to thebillalexandershow.com.